From recycled sci-fi soundtracks to a rattlesnake-infested film set, this forgotten Audie Murphy Western hides bizarre production secrets, including a director who only ever made 2 films, a future spaghetti Western icon in a minor role, and music that angered legendary composers like Henry Mancini when they discovered the shocking truth through Union Mail. Fact 1. Sci-fi music recycled into Western score. When you watch Posse from Hell, you might notice something unusual about the soundtrack. It sounds strangely futuristic for a Western set in the 1800s. That's because Universal's music director Joseph Gershenson pulled music from old science fiction films and reused it without telling anyone. The dramatic score you hear throughout the movie actually came from 2 classic sci-fi pictures. This Island Earth from 1955 and It Came from Outer Space from 1953. These films had completely different settings with alien planets and extraterrestrial encounters, yet somehow their music ended up scoring cowboys and outlaws riding through the desert. What makes this story even stranger is how the original composers found out about the recycling. Legendary composers like Henry Mancini, who wrote music for the original films, didn't receive their usual royalty checks for this new Western. Instead, they got notices in the mail from the Musicians Union informing them that their music had been reused in a different production. You can imagine their surprise when they discovered their carefully crafted science fiction compositions were now accompanying gunfights and horseback chases in a Western film. This practice wasn't exactly illegal since Universal owned the music rights, but it was considered shady in Hollywood circles because composers typically expected to be informed and compensated when their work appeared in new films. Gershenson was known for this kind of cost-cutting measure during his time at Universal, frequently recycling scores to save money on new productions. For Posse from Hell, the studio decided that paying for recycled music was cheaper than hiring composers to create an original Western score from scratch, even if it meant using music that was originally written for alien invasions and space adventures. Fact 2. 30 rattlesnakes cleared from filming location before the cast and crew of Posse from Hell could shoot a single frame of film. They faced a dangerous problem that had nothing to do with outlaws or gunfights. The production team had chosen a rocky hillside location in Lone Pine, California that locals called Rattlesnake Hill, and it turned out the name wasn't just colorful folklore. The area was genuinely infested with venomous rattlesnakes that posed a serious threat to everyone involved in the production. The film's crew had to bring in professional snake handlers and wranglers before they could safely set up cameras and equipment. These specialists spent hours carefully searching through the rocks, brush, and crevices around the filming location. By the time they finished their sweep of the area, they had removed exactly 30 live rattlesnakes from the hillside where actors would be performing and crew members would be working. Every single one of these snakes was a genuine Western diamondback rattlesnake, one of the most dangerous venomous species in North America. Even after the initial clearing, the production remained on high alert throughout filming at that location. The hot California desert was prime rattlesnake habitat, and there was always a chance that more snakes could wander into the area between shooting days. Cast members had to be particularly careful during action sequences that involved running across rocky terrain or taking cover behind boulders, since these were exactly the kinds of places where rattlesnakes like to hide during the day to escape the desert heat. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that a location called Rattlesnake Hill actually lived up to its name. For the actors, especially Audie Murphy and the rest of the Posse members who spent long days filming outdoor scenes in that rugged terrain, knowing that 30 rattlesnakes had been removed from the exact ground they were walking on added an extra layer of tension to an already physically demanding shoot. Fact 3. Hitchcock's right-hand man's directorial debut. Herbert Coleman spent years working alongside Alfred Hitchcock as his trusted associate producer on some of the greatest films ever made. He was the behind-the-scenes force helping to bring masterpieces like Vertigo, North by Northwest, Rear Window, and To Catch a Thief to the screen. Coleman had an insider's view of how one of cinema's greatest directors worked, learning the craft from watching Hitchcock orchestrate every detail of his suspense thrillers. After all that experience working on legendary films, Coleman finally got his chance to step into the director's chair himself with Posse from Hell in 1961. The transition from working with Hitchcock's sophisticated psychological thrillers to directing a straightforward Western might seem like an odd choice, but Coleman was eager to prove himself as a director in his own right. He brought some of Hitchcock's attention to visual composition and character psychology to this gritty Western, even though the genre and style were completely different from the films he had helped produce. Critics at the time noticed that Posse from Hell had more visual polish and careful framing than typical low-budget Westerns of that era, which likely reflected Coleman's years of learning from a master filmmaker. What makes this story particularly interesting is that despite his extensive experience and connections in Hollywood, Coleman never became the prolific director many expected him to be. Posse from Hell represented both his first major opportunity to direct and essentially his swan song as a feature film director. He proved he could handle the job competently, delivering a solid Western that met the studio's expectations. But for whatever reason, whether personal choice or lack of opportunities, he never pursued directing as a long-term career path. His legacy remained tied to his work with Hitchcock rather than his own brief directing career. Fact 4. Method acting confused America's war hero. When New York stage actress Zora Lampert arrived on the set of Posse from Hell, she brought with her all the techniques she had learned from method acting training. This approach emphasized emotional authenticity, improvisation, and staying in character, which was common among serious theater actors from New York, but relatively rare in Hollywood Westerns at that time. Lampert would frequently ad-lib dialogue and change her delivery based on emotional impulses in the moment, creating performances that felt raw and unpredictable. For her co-star Audie Murphy, who came from a completely different acting background, this improvisational style was bewildering and difficult to work with. Murphy had learned acting on the job in Hollywood Westerns, where scripts were followed precisely and performances were straightforward and efficient. As America's most decorated World War II soldier, he approached acting the same way he had approached military operations, with discipline, preparation, and sticking to the plan. When Lampert would suddenly change a line or react differently than she had in rehearsal, Murphy found himself genuinely confused about how to respond. He wasn't used to actors treating the script as a flexible starting point rather than exact instructions to follow. The clash of acting styles created tension during early filming, with Murphy sometimes appearing uncertain or off-balance in scenes with Lampert. Rather than let this problem derail the production, the two actors eventually worked out a compromise. They began meeting privately to rehearse their scenes together, allowing Lampert to explore her character's emotional range while giving Murphy a chance to prepare for her various possible reactions. These private rehearsals helped Murphy understand Lampert's approach and feel more comfortable responding naturally to her improvised moments. By the end of filming, the two actors had developed a working rhythm that actually enhanced their on-screen chemistry. Murphy's grounded, steady presence balanced Lampert's more unpredictable, emotional performance, creating scenes that felt authentic rather than rehearsed. Fact 5. Pre-stardom Lee Van Cleef. Role in Posse from Hell, Lee Van Cleef played a villain named Leo, delivering the kind of menacing performance he had been doing in B-movies and television westerns for years. At that point in 1961, Van Cleef was just another working actor, grinding out roles as bad guys, barely making a living in Hollywood. He had been typecast as a heavy since his film debut in High Noon back in 1952, appearing in countless forgettable westerns and crime films where he played thugs, gunfighters, and outlaws. Most audiences didn't even know his name, and his career seemed destined to remain in the shadows of more famous leading men. Everything changed 4 years later when Italian director Sergio Leone saw something special in Van Cleef's sharp features and intense screen presence. Leone cast him as Colonel Douglas Mortimer in For a Few Dollars More in 1965, pairing him with Clint Eastwood in what would become one of the most influential spaghetti westerns ever made. Suddenly, Van Cleef wasn't just another generic villain, he was an international star with his face on movie posters across Europe and eventually America. Leone understood that Van Cleef's angular face, piercing eyes, and quiet intensity were perfect for the stylized violence and operatic drama of Italian westerns. The transformation was remarkable. The same actor who had been playing forgettable villains in low-budget films like Posse from Hell became one of the most iconic faces of the spaghetti western genre. Van Cleef went on to star in classics like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, establishing himself as one of the defining actors of 1960s westerns. When you watch him in Posse from Hell, you're seeing a talented actor still waiting for his big break, just 4 years away from the role that would change his life and cement his place in cinema history. Fact 6. Starr was America's most decorated size soldier. Audie Murphy wasn't just playing a tough gunfighter in Posse from Hell, he was genuinely one of the most remarkable combat soldiers America has ever produced. During World War II, Murphy earned an astounding 33 military decorations for his service, including the Medal of Honor, which is the highest award for valor that the United States can give to a service member. He received these honors for extraordinary acts of bravery during combat in Europe, where he single-handedly held off an entire company of German soldiers and directed artillery fire while standing on a burning tank destroyer. His courage under fire made him a national hero and the most decorated American combat soldier of the entire war. What makes Murphy's military achievements even more remarkable is his physical appearance. He stood just 5 feet, 5 inches tall, and weighed only 110 pounds when he first tried to enlist after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Marines rejected him immediately, considering him too small and too young for military service. The Army paratroopers also turned him down for the same reasons. He was so desperate to serve his country that he eventually got his sister to falsify his birth certificate so he could meet the minimum age requirement, and he finally convinced the regular Army infantry to accept him despite his small stature. Once in combat, Murphy's size became irrelevant. His incredible reflexes, marksmanship, and fearless leadership made him a legendary soldier. He earned battlefield commissions rising from private to second lieutenant, and his fellow soldiers regarded him with a mixture of awe and disbelief at the risks he would take. When Murphy returned home as a war hero and transitioned into acting, Hollywood found the perfect leading man, someone who didn't have to pretend to be brave or tough because he had already proven it on the battlefield in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Fact 7. Director's entire feature film career, 2 movies, 1 year. Herbert Coleman's directing career was as brief as it was unusual. In 1961, he directed exactly 2 feature films, Posse from Hell and Battle at Bloody Beach. Both movies came out the same year, and then Coleman never directed another theatrical feature for the rest of his life. This seems almost impossible when you consider that he had been called probably the greatest assistant director who ever lived by people in the industry and had spent years working closely with Alfred Hitchcock on some of cinema's most celebrated films. Coleman had all the credentials to become a successful director. He understood cinematography, pacing, working with actors, and managing complex productions. His experience on Hitchcock's films gave him insight into visual storytelling that most aspiring directors could only dream about. Both of his directorial efforts were professional and competent, meeting the standards expected for their budgets and genres. Posse from Hell delivered exactly what Universal wanted, a solid Audie Murphy Western that would appeal to his established audience. There was nothing in either film that suggested Coleman couldn't handle directing work or lacked the necessary skills. So why did he stop? The reasons remain somewhat mysterious. Some people in Hollywood suggested that Coleman simply preferred the role of producer and assistant director, where he could help bring visions to life without bearing the ultimate responsibility that comes with being the director. Others speculated that the directing opportunities he wanted simply never materialized, or that he found the experience less satisfying than he had hoped. Whatever the reason, Coleman returned to working as an associate producer and assistant director after his brief 1961 directing experiment. His legacy in Hollywood rests primarily on his decades of work helping other directors, particularly Hitchcock, create masterpieces rather than on his own 2 directorial efforts. Fact 8. Villain played by Jennifer Jason. Lee's father, Vic Morrow, delivered a chilling performance as Crip, the ruthless leader of the outlaw gang terrorizing the town in Posse from Hell. Morrow specialized in playing intense, dangerous characters throughout his career, bringing a raw energy and unpredictability to villain roles that made audiences genuinely uncomfortable. What many viewers don't realize is that this menacing actor was the father of Jennifer Jason Leigh, who would go on to become an Oscar-nominated actress known for her own intense dramatic performances in films like The Hateful Eight and Anomalisa. The connection between father and daughter extended beyond genetics into their approach to acting. Both became known for fully committing to challenging roles and bringing psychological depth to complex characters. Jennifer Jason Leigh has spoken in interviews about watching her father work and learning about the craft of acting from observing his dedication and intensity. Morrow appeared primarily in television throughout the 1960s, most famously starring in the World War II series Combat, where he played Sergeant Chip Saunders for 5 seasons and became a household name. Tragically, Vic Morrow's life ended in one of Hollywood's most infamous accidents. In 1982, while filming a scene for Twilight Zone, the movie, a helicopter crashed during a night shoot, killing Morrow and 2 child actors instantly. The accident occurred during a Vietnam War sequence where Morrow was carrying the 2 children through a river while explosions went off around them. The incident led to major changes in film safety regulations and resulted in criminal trials, though the defendants were ultimately acquitted. Jennifer Jason Leigh was 19 years old when her father died, and the loss deeply affected her. She has rarely discussed the tragedy publicly, preferring to honor her father's memory through her own commitment to serious acting work rather than dwelling on the circumstances of his death. Fact 9. Writer adapted his own novel to screen. Claire Huffaker had the unique opportunity to adapt his own 1958 novel, Posse from Hell, into a screenplay, which gave him complete control over how the story transitioned from page to screen. However, even though he wrote both versions, Huffaker made one significant change when bringing the story to Universal Pictures. In the original novel, the character Banner Cole was an established deputy working under the town marshal, someone who knew the community and had roots in law enforcement. When Huffaker wrote the screenplay with Audie Murphy already cast as the lead, he transformed Banner Cole into something completely different, a mysterious outsider gunfighter with a shadowy past who reluctantly joins the posse. This change wasn't about improving the story or fixing problems with the novel's plot. It was entirely about matching the character to Murphy's established star persona that audiences expected when they bought tickets to see him in westerns. By 1961, Murphy had built his film career playing tough, independent gunfighters and loners rather than authority figures like sheriffs or deputies. His fans wanted to see him as the reluctant hero who operated outside conventional society, not as someone who took orders from a marshal. The studio knew that Murphy's box office appeal depended on maintaining this consistent screen image. Huffaker understood the practical realities of Hollywood filmmaking. He knew that star power mattered more than maintaining perfect fidelity to his original novel, especially in the Western genre where certain archetypes had proven commercially successful. The character change also allowed for more dramatic tension, since an outsider joining a posse created natural conflict and skepticism among the other members. As someone who wrote both pulp novels and screenplays for a living, Huffaker was comfortable making these kinds of adjustments to serve the needs of a different medium and a different audience. The adaptation demonstrates how, even when a novelist controls the screenplay, commercial considerations and star personas can significantly reshape the original story. Fact 10. Boldly addressed rape. In 1961, Western Posse from Hell stood out from typical westerns of its era by directly addressing a topic that most films carefully avoided: sexual violence against women. The plot centers on a posse chasing an outlaw gang that murdered several townspeople and raped a young woman named Helen Caldwell. This wasn't a detail mentioned briefly in exposition and then forgotten. The film made Helen's trauma and psychological damage central to the story, with her character appearing throughout the film and dealing with the aftermath of the assault. For a mainstream Western released in 1961, this frank acknowledgement of rape as a serious crime and its devastating impact on victims was genuinely unusual and controversial. The Hollywood production code that governed film content during this period had strict rules about how sexual content could be portrayed, making it extremely difficult for filmmakers to address rape directly. Most westerns of that era either avoided the topic entirely or used vague euphemisms that allowed audiences to infer what happened without stating it explicitly. Posse from Hell pushed against these restrictions by making the rape an unavoidable part of the narrative, though the screenplay still had to tiptoe delicately around direct references to comply with censorship standards. The script used careful language and relied on Zora Lampert's powerful performance to convey Helen's psychological trauma without violating the production code's prohibitions. What made this treatment even more significant was that the film didn't use Helen's assault merely as motivation for male characters to seek revenge. Instead, it attempted to show her perspective and her struggle to recover from the violence. This approach was ahead of its time, anticipating later films that would treat sexual violence with more seriousness and attention to victims' experiences. Critics of the era noticed this aspect of the film, with some praising its mature handling of difficult subject matter, while others felt uncomfortable with the topic appearing in a Western at all. Fact 11. Murphy held Universal's box office record. Until Jaws before Posse from Hell, Audie Murphy had already established himself as one of Universal Pictures' most valuable stars thanks to one extraordinary film. In 1955, Murphy starred in To Hell and Back, a movie adaptation of his own autobiography about his experiences as America's most decorated soldier during World War II. The film became a massive hit with audiences who wanted to see Murphy reenact his own heroic wartime exploits on screen. To Hell and Back broke box office records for Universal and became the studio's highest-grossing film up to that point, a testament to both Murphy's popularity and America's continued fascination with World War II stories. What makes this achievement truly remarkable is how long Murphy's record stood. For 20 years, To Hell and Back remained Universal's top-earning film, outlasting everything the studio released throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Year after year, despite Universal producing dozens of films across every genre, none of them could match the commercial success of Murphy's autobiography picture. The studio released big-budget productions, popular comedies, and other war films, but Murphy's combination of authentic heroism and modest charisma kept To Hell and Back at the top of Universal's all-time earnings list. The record finally fell in 1975 when a mechanical shark terrorized beach communities and movie theaters worldwide. Steven Spielberg's Jaws didn't just break Murphy's record, it obliterated it, becoming a cultural phenomenon that redefined what a blockbuster could be. The film made so much money that it changed Hollywood's entire approach to summer releases and marketing. But the fact that it took Jaws, one of the most successful films ever made, to finally surpass To Hell and Back shows just how impressive Murphy's box office dominance at Universal had been for 2 decades. Fact 12. Screenwriter had to make hero bigger than life. Claire Huffaker faced an unusual challenge when writing the screenplay for Posse from Hell. His leading man wasn't just another Hollywood actor pretending to be tough. Audie Murphy was a genuine American hero who had performed acts of bravery in World War II that sounded impossible, even when documented by military witnesses. Murphy had single-handedly fought off German forces, earned the Medal of Honor, and survived combat situations that killed soldiers all around him. Huffaker realized that writing a Western adventure for someone with Murphy's real-life credentials required a special approach that went beyond typical screenwriting. In interviews, Huffaker explained his dilemma directly. He said that when writing for Murphy, he couldn't just create a standard Western hero who shoots straight and displays ordinary courage. The character had to be placed in a situation where he has to do something bigger than life, because anything less would seem diminished compared to what Murphy had actually done on battlefields in Europe. This created an interesting creative problem. How do you write heroic action scenes for someone whose real heroism exceeded most fictional scenarios? Huffaker solved this by making Banner Cole face overwhelming odds and impossible moral choices that forced him to display exceptional bravery and resourcefulness. The solution resulted in a character who wasn't just physically brave, but also morally complex. Banner Cole had to make difficult decisions about justice, revenge, and protecting innocent people, while outnumbered and outgunned. Huffaker understood that Murphy's audience knew about his war record, so they expected to see him in situations that justified his reputation rather than ordinary Western gunfights that any competent actor could portray. The screenplay gave Murphy chances to demonstrate tactical thinking, selfless courage, and the kind of determination under pressure that had made him famous during the war. This approach to writing for Murphy became common among screenwriters who worked with him. Fact 13. Novelist was also cowboy, boxer, and smuggler. Claire Huffaker didn't just imagine the Western frontier and outlaw characters from research and imagination. He had actually lived a remarkably adventurous life before becoming a successful novelist and screenwriter. Before he ever sat down to write books like Posse from Hell, Huffaker worked as a genuine cowboy, spending time on ranches and learning firsthand about horses, cattle, and the hard physical labor of Western ranch life. This authentic experience gave his Western novels a sense of realism and detail that readers and critics noticed, since he understood the actual work and lifestyle rather than relying on Hollywood stereotypes. But Huffaker's colorful background didn't stop with cowboy work. He was also a champion boxer, competing in the ring and learning about violence, courage, and the psychology of combat in a direct physical way. This boxing experience influenced how he wrote fight scenes and confrontations in his Western stories, giving them a visceral quality that came from personal knowledge of what real fighting felt and looked like. The combination of cowboy skills and boxing training created a writer who understood both the frontier lifestyle and the reality of physical conflict. Perhaps most surprisingly, Huffaker openly admitted in interviews that he had worked as a part-time smuggler at some point in his life, though he never provided specific details about what he smuggled, where, or when. This confession added an outlaw dimension to his background that perfectly complemented his Western writing. Whether he was exaggerating for dramatic effect or genuinely confessing to illegal activity, the claim reinforced his image as someone who understood life on the margins of society. Huffaker eventually left these various adventures behind and devoted himself full-time to fiction writing, but the experiences clearly shaped the authenticity and edge that appeared in his novels and screenplays about Western outlaws, gunfighters, and frontier justice. Fact 14. Shot at iconic Western location used by Hopalong Cassidy. The rugged landscape you see in Posse from Hell isn't just any Western filming location. It's one of the most famous and frequently used sites in the history of Western films. The production shot at Alabama Hills, a dramatic rock formation area located near Mount Whitney in Lone Pine, California. This location had been a favorite of Western filmmakers since the silent era because the distinctive rock formations and desert landscape provided a perfect backdrop that looked authentically like the Old West frontier. By the time Posse from Hell arrived to film in 1961, the Alabama Hills had already appeared in hundreds of Western movies and television shows. The location's history in Hollywood was particularly connected to two legendary Western properties. The Hopalong Cassidy series, which made William Boyd a star and became one of the most popular Western franchises in film and television, filmed numerous episodes and movies among the Alabama Hills rocks. Those distinctive formations became so associated with Hopalong Cassidy that fans could recognize the location instantly. Additionally, the area served as the primary filming location for Randolph Scott's famous Renown Westerns, a series of critically acclaimed low-budget westerns directed by Bud Boetticher that are now considered among the finest examples of the genre. Scott and Boetticher returned to Alabama Hills repeatedly because the landscape provided such cinematic beauty and variety. When Posse from Hell filmed at this location, the production was essentially walking in the footsteps of Western movie history. The same rocks, valleys, and mountain views that had appeared behind countless cowboys and gunfights over the previous 4 decades now served as the backdrop for Audie Murphy and his posse. The location continues to be used for Western films and television shows even today, making it one of the most enduring and recognizable landscapes in American cinema. Fact 15. Zora Lampert's only big-screen Western role. Zora Lampert delivered what critics considered one of the most powerful and nuanced performances in Posse from Hell, playing Helen Caldwell with raw, emotional honesty that brought depth to a traumatized character who could have easily become a one-dimensional victim in a less skilled actress's hands. Lampert brought her New York theater training and method acting techniques to the role, creating a portrayal of trauma and resilience that stood out in a genre typically more focused on action and violence than psychological complexity. Her performance earned praise from reviewers who noted how she elevated the material and brought dramatic weight to scenes that could have been melodramatic or exploitative. What makes Lampert's achievement in Posse from Hell particularly notable is that she never appeared in another theatrical Western film for the rest of her career. This wasn't because she gave a bad performance or disliked working in Westerns, quite the opposite. She simply never received another offer to appear in a big-screen Western, or perhaps chose not to pursue such roles. Lampert went on to have a successful career in film and television, appearing in productions like Let's Scare Jessica to Death and winning acclaim for her stage work, but the Western genre remained a one-time experience for her. This makes Posse from Hell her sole entry into Western cinema, which seems like a missed opportunity given how effectively she brought dramatic depth to the genre. While many actors built entire careers appearing in Western after Western, and some became so typecast they couldn't escape the genre, Lampert had the unusual distinction of making just one Western film and then moving on to completely different types of roles. For fans of classic Westerns and for Lampert's admirers, Posse from Hell remains the only chance to see what she could bring to frontier stories, making her performance in the film all the more special and unique in her body of work.